Welcome to the latest meeting of the Oversight Board for Puerto Rico. I'm David Skeel, the chairman of the board, and I would like to welcome all of you who are present on video again this time, since it's not yet possible to meet in person. As always, we ask that those who are live streaming and are connected to the video conference, we ask that all of you cooperate in assuring that we have a productive meeting, in particular by keeping on mute throughout the conference. Before we officially kick things off, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our two newest members of the Oversight Board, John Nixon and Betty Rosa. We're eager for the opportunity to gain their valuable input, and we know it will be extremely valuable during this public meeting, outside of public meetings, and in the public meetings to come, as we continue the board's mission of establishing fiscal discipline for Puerto Rico and hopefully get the Commonwealth out of bankruptcy. Both of our newest members are at the absolute top of their respective fields. Dr. Betty Rosa is a nationally recognized education leader with more than 30 years of instructional and administrative experience. She's currently the interim commissioner of education and president of the University of the State of New York. We are honored that she will be with us and part of our team going forward. My understanding is that she'll be on this call in just a few minutes. She's not able to be on right now, but she will be joining us shortly. In John Nixon's case, he's had a distinguished career that includes stints as budget directors for the governments of both Michigan and Utah. As Michigan's budget director from 2011 to 2014, he helped eliminate a budget deficit of $1.5 billion and also to reduce the state's long-term liabilities by more than $20 billion. And that's just scratching the beginning of the list of his many accomplishments. It's likewise an honor to have him here with us. And I'll also mention, before I pause for a second, that alongside of our two new members, we have Justin Peterson, who is at this point a veteran, having joined a couple of months ago. And we hope to soon have Antonio Medina, whom the president has announced his intention to appoint. And so he will hopefully be joining us very soon. This new composition of the board, the new members of the board, comprise an important and essential new chapter in the work of the Oversight Board. We're confident that they will bring fresh perspectives to our task, and that just like the previous iteration of the board, they will place the good of Puerto Rico and of its people foremost in everything that they do with the board. So we'll welcome Betty Rosa in just a minute, but John Nixon, I would like to welcome you publicly to the board.
Thank you, David. I appreciate being on and having been appointed to the board. I'm really excited to get working with you and with all the other interested parties. As you've mentioned, I've had a lot of great experience in government finances. I've been a part of some big changes in government and good governance. Not only have I run the finance side, but I've also run the administrative side. And I've really appreciate all the great experience I've had and the great opportunities I've had. I look forward to bringing that experience to the board, and again, working in a collaborative way to help lift Puerto Rico out of bankruptcy. I know there are a lot of, this is a very difficult situation. I know there's going to have to be a lot of tough decisions. I appreciate the work the board's done heretofore. And like I said, I look forward to bringing my expertise to Puerto Rico. I at one time I was fluent in Spanish, and there was a suggestion maybe I try to make a statement in Spanish right now, but I'm a little bit out of practice, David. But I look forward to using this as an opportunity and a challenge to get my Spanish back up to a conversational level. But like I said, I know we've got a tough situation, and I'm one that really looks at the data and all the facts. And as I'm onboarding again with the appointment being made last week, I'm still fresh on all the issues, but I look forward to participating today to the extent I can. And I just appreciate and I'm ready to go to work.
Thanks so much, John. We are, it's no understatement to say thrilled to have you on board. Your expertise is exactly the kind of expertise that we need on the board, and we've got a remarkable board with a remarkable range of expertise, and you'll be a fabulous addition to it. So why don't we shift towards the formal part of the meeting. I'll begin by calling a roll call to see who is present and whether we have a quorum for the meeting.
David?
Mr. Chairman?
Betty Rosa,
Point out
Dr.
that Betty
Rosa
Rosa joined.
she's just joined us, so if you want to.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. So I don't see Betty Rosa yet, but I hear that she is with us. And again, welcome. Dr. Rosa, is there anything you want to say before we begin the meeting?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Gracias. First and foremost, I just want to start by saying que me siento muy honrada de haber sido nombrada a esta junta de supervisión, ya que el propósito de esta junta es un beneficio de esta tierra que yo vi crecer durante mi infancia y lo que yo amo tanto. Soy y siempre seré puertorriqueña. Viví aquí durante las primeras etapas de mi vida, antes de mudarme hacia los Estados Unidos, pero siempre dejé parte de mi corazón con esta isla y me mantengo al tanto y comunicación con mi familia. A pesar de las oportunidades que he tenido y los logros que he podido cosechar a lo largo de mi carrera, siempre tuve el deseo de contribuir a mi tierra natal con todas mis destrezas, experiencias y empeño. Y ser nombrada a esta junta de supervisión me brinda esta oportunidad dorada, por lo cual estoy eternamente agradecida. Por otro lado, mi experiencia profesional me brinda una perspectiva un poco distinta al resto de mis compañeros. El valor de la educación ha sido el principio fundamental que ha gobernado gran parte de mi vida profesional y personal. Y mis esfuerzos aquí en la Junta estarán guiados mayormente por este mismo principio. Una vez más, muchísimas gracias por esta oportunidad y estoy muy agradecida. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosa. As I said with John Nixon, we are absolutely thrilled to have you on the board. You have an enormous amount of absolutely essential expertise. Obviously, education in particular is one of the greatest on the island of Puerto Rico. So we are greatly looking forward to working.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
I just want to underscore and welcome both John and Dr. Rosa to the board. John, I think her Spanish is better than yours. But I would
That's definite.
Dr. Rosa, before you got on, John was telling us that he was at one point fluent in Spanish, which is better than me. So I just want to underscore what the chairman said about this being an exciting chapter. I think it's great that we're getting new blood on the board. We've got a lot of work to do. And I know David and Natalie will probably be happy that we've got 5 members now, so it'll be easier to keep quorum. So thank you.
We are indeed getting closer and closer to full strength. We'll be almost there, hopefully next week. And it is an exciting chapter. I think we're on the cusp of some major advances, or at least I'm hoping that's where we're headed. So why don't we begin with a roll call? And it seems like we're in order of appointment. It appears to be our order rather than alphabetical order. And as somebody who spent his life at the end of the alphabet, I'm really glad that we're mixing up the number. But we do have Andrew Biggs first. Andrew, are you here?
Yes, I am present.
Thank you. Justin Peterson?
Present.
Betty Rosa,
Present.
John Nixon,
Present.
and our ex officio member, Governor Vasquez's representative, Executive Director Omar Marrero. Are you here?
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Present, and welcome, Betsy Rosa, as well. It's a pleasure and honor to have you in this board. Gracias por su servicio.
Gracias a usted.
It looks like we do indeed have a quorum present, so we can now call the meeting to order. I would like to ask our General Counsel, Jaime El Khoury, if he would be willing once again to serve as secretary for the meeting.
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much, Jaime. Thanks to all of you in attendance at this public meeting, which, as I've mentioned, and as you know, is being held by video conference.
Change the light.
Somebody want to talk, or no, that was just background. Thanks to all of you who are watching through the live stream, as almost everybody is. The live stream is at the board's website, www.oversightboard.pr.gov. G-O-W. I'm pleased to say once again that the audio of this meeting is via the webcast is available both in English and in a simultaneous Spanish translation, as well as being translated in sign language. If you log into the English version of the website, the audio will be in English. If you log into the Spanish version of the website, you'll hear the simultaneous Spanish translation. The Oversight Board will once again be handling the public's questions and comments through a form that's available on the board's website. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, just click on the webcast page, fill out the form, including your name and any questions or comments, and the board will later answer them during the assigned Q&A period or comment period towards the end of the public meeting. Questions that we don't have time to answer during this meeting, if there are questions we don't have time to answer, we won't forget about, we will answer them. And what we'll do is we will post the answer to those questions on our website. Today, we once again have a relatively full agenda. Let me just quickly go through the things that we'll be doing in the next hour or two. We'll begin with approval of the minutes from the last public meeting of the board. We'll then do a few administrative matters. We'll have an update from Executive Director Natalie Jaresko on the economic outlook in 2021. We'll also have an overview or a report on a ease of doing business survey that the Oversight Board has conducted. The fourth item on our agenda is reapportioning or reprogramming under Section 204C of PROMESA. Fifth item is certification of a CDBG plan. Sixth item is a report on an investigation, an investigation that the Oversight Board has conducted involving BDO. Then we'll have a public comment period, and then finally any other matters that come up we can take up at the end of the meeting. So beginning with the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, the proposed minutes are included in the meeting materials attached as an appendix to the meeting materials. Does anybody have a question on the minutes from the last meeting? I know two of us were not on the board at the last meeting, but are there any questions about the minutes or any suggestions or comments on the minutes? I have one tiny thing, which is I think there's a typo, Jaime, on page 9. The word devastate, I think, unless it's been changed since last night, and I didn't have time to email to make that note. But no substantive comments from.
We'll make that change
from me as well. Thanks, Jaime. Do I have a motion or does any board member move to approve the minutes from the last public meeting?
Sure. I would move to approve the minutes of the board's public meeting held on November 20th, 2020, as presented on Appendix A, in the form presented to the meeting with the typo on page 9 corrected.
Hopefully there really is a typo to be corrected. Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Justin. So I'll take a voice vote, first of all in favor, and then it'll be of all opposed. And I'll also, after that, ask if anybody is abstaining. So first, all in favor, please say yes. Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, say no. And any abstaining?
I'll abstain, Mr. Chairman, as I was not part of the board meeting.
I thought you might. Great. The motion passes with no votes, but with an abstention. And so the meetings are formally approved. So moving to our second agenda item, we have a couple of administrative items, a couple of resolutions, hopefully, that board members will make. Do I hear a motion for the first of the resolutions that would have to do with executive session?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I propose the resolution that between the adjournment to this meeting and the opening of the board's next public meeting, the board may consider an executive session any and all matters it is authorized to consider under PROMESA, including first, any certification determinations authorized by PROMESA, including certification determinations under Section 206 of PROMESA. Second, any submissions or authorizations authorized by PROMESA. And third, any filings authorized under Title III of PROMESA in each case that are set forth as part of the vote to convene such executive session. The board may also act by unanimous written consent between meetings in accordance with the bylaws, with such consent to include consent by electronic transmission.
Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
John. Once again, I'll ask for a voice vote, starting with in favor, then opposed, then any abstentions. First, those in favor, so please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is therefore unanimously approved, and we can move on to our next agenda item, which is the next item. I thought we had a second motion, but we just have one under administrative matters. So the next agenda item, the third item on our agenda, is an update from our executive director, Natalie Jaresko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to provide everyone, as we end this year, this very difficult and complicated year, with a look and a view to 2021, where we're heading with a new board, with a new government, with a new legislature here in Puerto Rico, with a new government and legislature in Washington, D.C., where the economy is headed, what is on the minds of the business community, and talk about some of the priorities for the year. First, I'd like to ask Ricardo Fuentes, our economist, to provide us a look at the economic outlook for 2021. Ricardo?
Thank you, Natalie. If you could move to the next slide, please. Right. A wide variety of forecasts have been produced by international organizations such as the United Nations, the World Bank, and IMF. As you can see on the right-hand graph, most forecasts suggest that the US, Latin America, and the Caribbean will see some recovery in 2021. However, none expect a swift and complete recovery. Expected growth rates in 2021 would not return these economies to their pre-pandemic levels. Next slide, please. The Congressional Budget Office's, or CBO's, forecast for the US economy is particularly relevant for our purposes. The Certified Fiscal Plan uses the CBO's forecast as an input in its macroeconomic projections, under the assumption that growth in the US economy is one of several factors that impacts growth in the Puerto Rican economy. The 2020 Fiscal Plan used the CBO's April forecast. However, since then, the CBO has released multiple updates. The latest update suggests a stronger recovery in 2021. However, this forecast was produced prior to the latest rise in deaths per day of close to 3,000 in the US. The next CBO release will be in January, and we expect to see some changes in that forecast. Next slide, please. The fiscal plan's baseline scenario, which used the April CBO numbers, which is shown in blue in the upper right-hand graph, assumed that the pandemic would recede during the second half of 2020 and continue a modest recovery into 2021. The fiscal plan's downside scenario, shown in red in the graph above, intended to reflect the possibility of the virus not receding during this period, which might be accompanied with additional restrictions or lockdowns. As we know, the virus did not recede and additional restrictions have been put in place. However, the economic activity index, shown in the bottom graph, has shown some signs of recovery starting in July. Nevertheless, as of September, we were still about 6% below the pre-pandemic levels. In the absence of additional federal stimulus, combined with the recent spike in cases and additional restrictions, these all suggest a slower pace of recovery may already be underway. Next slide, please. In line with the reduction in economic activity, the expectation is that prices will remain relatively low. Fiscal year 20 closed with a 0% inflation rate, and the fiscal plan forecast expects inflation to remain close to zero in 2021, or about 0.3%, and fiscal years 22 and 23 are expected to continue seeing low inflation of about 1%. The key takeaway is that the short term is characterized by much uncertainty. However, the fiscal plan's baseline and downside scenarios still provide a good sense of the range of possibilities. A variety of factors may push the economy anywhere within this range, including the availability of vaccines for the general population and the effectiveness of the distribution logistics, whether there is incremental federal stimulus approved in Congress, citizen cooperation with CDC guidelines and the government's executive order, and the extent of scarring in the economy. And this second point is worth discussing in some detail. Next slide, please. Economists and international organizations such as the World Bank have highlighted that the pandemic will likely leave deep scars on productivity and output via dislocation of labor or a tightening of credit. In other words, beyond its short-term impact, the pandemic is likely to leave lasting scars through multiple channels, including lower investment or erosion of the human capital of the unemployed. And this may have impact particularly in younger generations of workers. Evidence from past business cycles suggests that those who enter the labor market during downturns are scarred for many years thereafter, with lower employment and wages than similar individuals from cohort that entered at better times. Now, slower job recovery in key sectors in Puerto Rico already suggests deeper scarring. On average, the job recovery has been slower than in the mainland. In Puerto Rico, 46% of the jobs lost in April were recovered by October, compared to 67% in the United States. Leisure and hospitality is one of the hardest hit sectors, where they've seen a reduction of 43% employment lost in April, approximately 35,000 jobs, and roughly 41% of the lost jobs were recovered by October. During the same time frame, the US recovered 67% of lost jobs. Trade, transportation, and utilities lost about 42,000 jobs in April and recovered 69% of these by October. And this compares to a recovery of 82% of the lost jobs in the mainland US. Construction lost about 10,000 jobs in April and recovered 54% of the jobs by October, comparing to 126% recovery in the United States. In addition, could you go back please 1 second? In addition, recently, the Puerto Rican Restaurant Association has published internal surveys and estimates that suggest that 25% of restaurants will permanently close due to the pandemic, which may represent the loss of up to 30,000 jobs. Next slide. In terms of younger workers in Puerto Rico, it is worth noting that they were in a much more vulnerable position prior to the pandemic. As is evident from the right-hand graph, unemployment is structurally higher for younger workers in Puerto Rico. Yet the percentage of the population with a bachelor's degree or higher increased from 21% in 2010 to 26% in 2019. In other words, a higher proportion of younger Puerto Ricans are seeking and obtaining college degrees, but will face a labor market further weakened by the pandemic. And as mentioned previously, research has shown that this may have long-lasting impacts in their career development and income, and this may also further accelerate outmigration. Despite the uncertain short term, the long-term prospect remains the same for Puerto Rico, a shrinking economy and population. In the upper right-hand graph, we may observe the secular decline of the Economic Activity Index, which began in 2006. And this is a structural decline driven by structural factors. In the absence of structural changes in the economy, one would expect this trend to continue. And this is also accompanied by the demographic decline. The population has decreased significantly, not only due to the outmigration driven by this structural recession, but also by declining births. As is shown in the bottom right-hand graph, the number of annual births, shown in blue, fell from approximately 60,000 in 2000 to approximately 20,000 in 2019. Births fell below the number of deaths, shown in red, in 2016. And this implies a natural decrease in the population from this point onward, as shown in the black line. And this is also reflected in the fiscal plan's long-term projections, which show deficits returning in the 2030s. Now, there is still much that could be done to change this trajectory, such as focusing on improving ease of doing business, K-12 education, energy reliability, workforce development, and infrastructure. In other words, the fiscal plan's structural reforms are the first step towards changing this trajectory. It is also important to focus on institutional capacity issues, such as civil service reform, that may increase government effectiveness in implementing reforms. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. If I may, I'd like to ask Lizzie Rosso, who's our Ease of Doing Business Manager, to share some of the insights from the most recent survey that we did with the business community here on the island. The health of the private sector and its ability to create investments, to create jobs on the island, are central to Puerto Rico's economic recovery. Lizzie?
Good morning. Thank you, Natalie. We performed a survey in October among the business community to gauge any change, positive or negative, regarding the ease of doing business on the island. The purpose is to better understand their experience with specific business processes, such as permitting in Puerto Rico, which is a fundamental part of the ease of doing business on the island, and to capture the sentiments regarding the island's economic trajectory. We had a very good response of 649 businesses that was distributed by over 20 professional associations, such as the Puerto Rico Chamber of Commerce and the Puerto Rico Manufacturers Associations, pre-cost tenants, and their list of incentive decrees, among others. One of the good things is that the survey was answered mostly by the owners and senior executives, so we had a great participation. In the responses, we have representation of 19 different industries, but mostly small companies with sales of less than $10 million, of which 65% with less than $1 million and 86% with less than 20 employees. In Puerto Rico, based on the last census, 96% of the companies have 50 employees or less. So this is a good sample and representative of what's the type of business that we have on the island. The results demonstrate that the most businesses have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 49% of the company's workforce was affected negatively during the pandemic, either laid off, furloughed, or their working hours were reduced. 68% indicated that the quality of life in Puerto Rico is low after the pandemic. Next slide, please. Very few respondents were not affected by the pandemic, and that's 7%, which indicated that they have a positive impact, and those are probably the industries that distribute food and the types of industries that had a positive impact. To recover from the pandemic, 50% of the respondents indicated that they will need a loan. However, 67% of the respondents claim that there are very few financing options available. And that's partly due because in Puerto Rico, there has been a reduction in the banking institutions. We only have 3 financial institutions presently doing financing for this type of business, small businesses. When the survey was done, the government COVID-related restrictions were less stringent than the current executive order. Nevertheless, 1/3 of the respondents indicated that stronger government health and safety support was needed, such as contact tracing or more widespread testing. Because most of the respondents are small business, their offering of products and services through the internet was very limited or non-existent before the pandemic. Therefore, 42% need to redesign their business logistics or require technical expertise for their business to adjust. Next slide, average revenue reduction for respondent was 63%. The arts and the entertainment and recreation and the accommodation and food services industries were the most affected as expected. Next slide, please. While in the lockdown, 78% of the respondents needed services from the government, which is a very high number. However, 54% indicated that the service obtained was bad, and only 25% could obtain the services online. 4% could obtain the services in person. So we don't know how they could obtain the services, but that's related to the satisfaction that they obtain. This really validates the need for the government to digitize its services. And this was the best example. On slide 7, the delay in implementing the ease of doing business reforms in Puerto Rico by the government is clearly reflected in the survey results. 74% of respondents rated operating a business in Puerto Rico from somewhat difficult to very difficult. We wanted to know what essential factors are more important to businesses in terms of ease of doing business. We found high-speed internet connectivity to be the #1 with 90% response, followed by energy reliability and corporate tax rate. The fiscal plan is addressing the most important needs for Puerto Rico businesses by approving $400 million for high-speed internet, energy reforms, ease of doing business, and human capital reforms. It is very interesting to know that while 80% of the respondents consider energy reliability and cost to be an essential factor for the business, 85% of the respondents consider the energy supply unreliable and too costly. Something similar happens with corporate tax rate, where 78% indicated it is an essential factor. However, the majority consider the tax rate to be too high and will be, as we'll be seeing in the next slide. Next slide, please. In terms of the corporate tax rate, 77% indicated that it is very high and that of the total that responded, 16% indicated that if increased, their business continuity will be threatened, and 3.7% of the total indicated that they are evaluating to establish operations in another jurisdiction with lower taxes. Of the latter, there are 2 manufacturing companies with sales over 50 million and over 100 employees. In a recent study by the Tax Foundation, the nation's leading independent tax policy nonprofit, Puerto Rico was the 2nd highest statutory corporate income tax rate in the world in 2020, with a rate of 37.5 as compared to the average of 23.85 and 25.85 when weighted by GDP. That's for 177 separate tax jurisdictions. This rate does not take into consideration tax credits, preferential tax rates, and others, which benefit mostly large companies. Therefore, small businesses pay mostly the statutory, therefore the higher rates. 47% of respondents stated that the labor force is considered completely skilled or easily trained and are adaptable to support their business, while 22% indicated difficulty in finding skilled employees. This demonstrates the need for better use of federal funds available for training the working force in the skills necessary for businesses. The 2020 fiscal plan allocates $50 million for a 21st century technical and business education fund, with the objective of developing a plan for 21st century skills for the entire workforce pipeline in Puerto Rico. Programs such as WIOA should also be revamped to assure that they are working together with the private sector in meeting their needs and barriers to employment on the island are reduced. One very interesting note is that only 6% of respondents are benefiting from government programs such as subsidies to cover their labor costs. In relation to our sample, this could mean that small businesses do not benefit from these programs. On slide 9, in terms of highway, could you please? Okay, thank you. In terms of highways, the port's infrastructure and real estate, that the results demonstrate the need for improvement. 80% consider the cost for transportation to be very high. These factors must be considered in Puerto Rico efforts to attract new manufacturing by assigning priority to the improvements of highways, ports, and pre-cost facilities. Next slide, please. 25% of the respondents receive some type of government incentive. Based on the respondents' composition, this would mean that small business either do not have access or knowledge of government incentives. And for those that receive incentives, 65% are related to taxes. 85% of respondents consider the energy supply to be unreliable and costly, while most of them express this to be essential for their operation. Of these, 45% plan to invest in alternative energy systems to lower costs to operate. And 67% of respondents claim that there are not enough financing options in Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. Now we will discuss the experience of those respondents that use government services. In the last 6 months, 37% of the respondents attained to obtain a construction or business permit. Of these, 88% consider the process from difficult to substantially more difficult, with the leading reason for difficulty being the multiple agencies that must be consulted, lack of clarity in requirements, and lack of interest from permitting officials. While the government invested on a system, single business portal, to simplify the process, 68% consider it to be difficult. The fiscal plan calls for reforms to the permits process to simplify, clarify, and accelerate the approval process. Next slide. Next slide. Low usage of the SBP, the Single Business Portal, could be due to the use of permit consultants that have become a necessary staple due to the complexity and time-consuming process. The consultants know how to navigate the system to accelerate approvals. 80% of respondents that use SBP are small businesses. For many small businesses, using a consultant is too expensive, and as evidence in the sample, they are the ones that process the permits themselves. However, 68% of these indicated that SBP is difficult to use. Regarding the property register, those who attempted to register a deed or document in the last 6 months, 55% consider the process somewhat difficult, to substantially more difficult and rated the system to process the registration as average. Next slide, please. 54% of respondents consider filing taxes difficult due to the tax code and SURI, which is the system that is used to process the taxes. They understand the SURI is complex and also the frequency of filings. 92% of survey respondents classify SURI as making the process of filing somewhat easier to substantially easier. This was the first time this year that SURI was used for filing corporate taxes. Next slide, please. We also asked participants to give us their perspectives on their expectations for the next 12 months. Due to the profound impact of the pandemic, 85% indicated that they plan to benefit from available programs such as an SBA loan, CARES Act help or loan, COVID relief, among others. Only 28% expect their industry and their business revenues to grow in the next 12 months, and 37% plan to make a capital investment. It is very important to know that the survey was performed before the announcement of the approval of the COVID vaccines. This is basically the summary of our findings on the survey, and we will continue to survey quarterly to compare how the business environment is changing and to determine if changes implemented by the government are having an impact on businesses' perceptions.
Thank you, Lizzie. And it's with this background in mind that we head into the end of this year and look forward to 2021. I'd like to update you, the other board members, and the public on several critical initiatives that we will be closely tracking going forward. As we've discussed in previous meetings, completing the restructuring of the Commonwealth and PREPA bankruptcies are key goals. Completing that exit from bankruptcy for about $35 billion and $9 billion respectively in debt, which would take us to, upon completion, 95% of the total debt being restructured. As you can see from the page being shown, this morning I'm going to review the non-debt related goals and critical areas of focus for 2021. First, the status and progress of getting completed audited financial statements for fiscal years 2018, 19, and 20. Second, the structural reforms embedded in the fiscal plan, which kick in starting in 2021 and are required for growth in Puerto Rico. Third, the fiscal measures that must be implemented by the government in 2021 if they are to meet fiscal plan targets and achieve a more manageable and efficient government. And fourth, with great deals of funds appropriated and obligated by the federal government, 2021 should be the kickoff of a great deal of investment into reconstruction and resiliency on the island after the hurricanes and earthquakes. So I'll give just a quick update on the disaster recovery process, including key milestones achieved in 2020 and upcoming inflection points related to FEMA Section 428 funding, CDBG-DR funding, and earthquake relief in 2021. And finally, we can't forget that we continue to battle the pandemic, and effectively putting to work the local and federal funds available from the CARES Act and our own budget remains critically important. Next page. So the first topic, and I'll actually not go into all details, but all of this will be posted on the website. Some of it you've seen from previous board meetings. But the first topic I'd like to discuss is the status of the government's consolidated audited financial statements, commonly referred to as CAFRs. Getting the government to publish the CAFRs on a timely basis has been and remains a priority of the board. The government, however, remains behind on its goal to publish its audited financial statements on a timely basis. The fiscal year 2017 CAFR, which is the latest available audited financial statement, was published this past August, which is about 3 years beyond the best practices suggested timeframe of 180 days after the fiscal year. The fiscal year 2018 audited financials are already more than 2 years behind schedule. And the government right now expects to publish those 2018 CAFRs in April of 2021. On this chart, I'm just showing that the government has also does not expect to complete 2019 and 2020 audited financials until May of 2022. That's more than a year after the completion date that the board has required. We've had separate public hearings, and I won't go into great detail. We had them in July and August. They'll be on our website. But we have made it clear to the government that this timeline is unacceptable and inconsistent with the intent of PROMESA. And even though we have several new board members with us today, I imagine all of them share a similar sentiment and concern about the need for timely financial statements and reporting. You can go to the next page. We've talked about general causes previously, and where we are, the board is committed to doing everything possible to ensure that the government can complete the delayed audited financial statements and begin to issue new statements on a timely basis. We look forward to working with Governor-elect Pierluisi and his team to end the discussions and make this happen. Please turn to the next page. On structural reform priorities, and we've talked about them again before, I'll go very quickly through them. These are things that need to be implemented to give us a chance to change the direction of that economic line that you saw in a previous slide. If we want Puerto Rico to become competitive, to attract new investment to the island, to maintain and grow its entrepreneurial class, to create new and valuable jobs for the residents of the island. Next page. We are closely following up on all of the different initiatives that have been outlined in the fiscal plan to ensure timely execution. These have an impact on GNP growth. That impact on GNP growth results in higher tax revenues, and that higher tax revenues are important to meeting all of the needs of the budget of Puerto Rico. I won't go through every single one of them. I just want to give a couple highlights from each one. So for human capital and welfare reform, the first category, one of the key milestones that the government needs to pursue in 2021 is establishing the work requirement within the Nutritional Assistance Program, the NAP program, and assigning third-party analytic partners to oversee that implementation. Creating the Workforce Development Partnership Office and selecting its executive directors so that they can operationalize all the different workforce development programs that are defined in the fiscal plan. These two things are critical for us to ensure that that scarring on the economy that Ricardo spoke about earlier is minimized, to provide the training and opportunity to those who may have had their jobs permanently eliminated during the pandemic, which some local economists have estimated to be up to 100,000. These elements can turn that around. In K through 12 education, amongst the most important actions to be taken during the upcoming year is designing a strategic plan for education that'll drive the implementation of all the educational initiatives in the fiscal plan, and the development of a comprehensive distance learning strategy and a corresponding post-COVID back to school plan. This came up in a previous meeting, but children in Puerto Rico in the public school system have missed about 30 weeks of school since hurricanes hit the island, and some have missed this entire calendar year. A friend commented to me yesterday that we cannot underestimate the need to focus on this. With a workforce of about 1 million people, it would be sad to think that 10 years from now, if we don't redouble our efforts right now, we will have another 275,000 people in the workforce, or not even trying to join the workforce, that were not given a fair chance to thrive. Next page. On the ease of doing business, again, you heard about the business sentiments. The fiscal plan outlines a handful of key actions. I would just say that simplification, liberalization of all permitting and regulation streams identified, that's permitting, property registration, tax administration, freight regulation, and then finalizing the administrative and legislative changes to liberalize the occupational licensing requirements. All of this just to create a more competitive environment, attract more investment, create new jobs. In this global competition for every dollar, we have to make the best use of our existing competitive advantages, and we have to build upon them to attract incremental investment. We know our weaknesses and we know how to cure them. 2021 is the time to lift Puerto Rico up and out. So in the context of a post-vaccine world, we can not only relaunch our tourism industry, but take advantage of the reshoring of pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturers back to the United States. Next page. Maybe not the next page, come back, sorry. Energy reform. The key initiatives here are to start executing the regulatory reform that's been begun. The main focus being to support the independence of the recently created energy regulator and enable it to execute on its mandate of overseeing transparency and accountability in the sector. Second, we need to complete the transition from the public monopoly electricity grid to private operators, such as Luma. Lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, we need to complete the bankruptcy and restructure the legacy debt and pension obligations at PREPA. So the transformation of PREPA is the key to achieving low-priced, more reliable, cleaner, and safer electricity for all our homes and all businesses. Page 8. The last structural reform in the fiscal plans and the focus, a great focus for next year, infrastructure reform. Improving the efficiency and effectiveness of infrastructure and capital investments is critical to improve mobility, increase convenience, lower costs for business, and given the amount of federal funds beginning to flow to the island, there are incredible opportunities to take advantage. All of these are the structural reforms that are crucial to ensure the economic growth that's projected in the fiscal plan. Next page. In addition to those structural reforms, the certified fiscal plan includes fiscal measures. And implementing these fiscal measures through 2021 is what will ensure well-managed, efficient government services. I'm just going to walk through a handful of them. There's quite a bit of detail, but I also assure you that each agency has its own series. So it looks like a lot, but remember that it's each department, each agency has its own. Just a handful. So each agency has its own that are on this list, but there are some cross-cutting measures that I just want to highlight. And first, that is finalization and effective implementation of the 15 pending consolidations that are yet to be completed of the 19 proposed by the government and included into the certified fiscal plan. One example at the Department of Education on the fiscal side is that they need to continue to pursue procurement efficiencies, including moving more and more to centralized procurement through the GSA or General Services Administration, improving their regional central model to ensure lack of redundant overlapping positions, and continue to pursue the savings from the already closed schools. At the Department of Health, we need to finalize the consolidation of the Department of Health and Assess, which includes planning those consolidation efforts, defining the transition plans, and ensuring that that consolidation is done efficiently. At the Department of Public Safety, as an example, we still are working on rebalancing the staffing to reduce overtime costs and to finalize the hiring of 900 civilians within the Police Bureau to enable the sworn officers to move into the field and be out on the streets in the community. I have to mention that the firefighters also need to launch their academy so they can hire the firefighters and combat the attrition in the fire department. In the Department of Corrections, there is an entire back office process redesign to adapt to the 20% growth in officer to inmate ratios that's been observed since the beginning of this fiscal year. In the Department of Economic Development, amongst other things, they need to build upon the progress already made in the consolidations. So with key organizations like PRIDCO that are now being brought in, drive the progress in reducing frontline personnel, finalize that physical footprint for all the agencies, and finalize procurement contract negotiations. And finally, I'll mention on the next page, an important element of the fiscal measures in the fiscal plan refers to Medicaid. Medicaid costs are rising faster than inflation in Puerto Rico, and everything possible needs to be done to try and break that curve. There are two areas that I'd highlight. One is that there are several opportunities for the government to achieve savings by reducing fraud, waste, and abuse in the healthcare system. They have to leverage what's called the MMIS, Medicaid Management Information System, which is the claims processing system required by CMS. Another action would be to strengthen verification of enrollment. These are standards that were established by CMS. And pursuant to federal Further Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2020, Puerto Rico must continue to make progress in this area. So one is in that reduction of fraud, waste, and abuse. The second is in pursuing value-based improvement initiatives that could generate savings while allowing and improving better healthcare outcomes. The government has decided to produce something called the DRG-based payment model, the diagnosis-related group-based payment model. And this helps control medical costs by incentivizing providers to deliver cost-effective care without sacrificing quality. So they need to begin testing this payment model as soon as possible so it can be launched in July of 2021. I'll mention tax compliance on the revenue side. The measures don't only affect the expenditure side, they also affect the revenue side. And in tax compliance and fee enhancement, it is a continuous effort to achieve the target of a 5% net uplift in annual revenues due to enhanced compliance, not increased tax rates, but enhanced compliance and more fair collection across major tax lines. In the reductions in appropriations to the University of Puerto Rico, reducing these appropriations has been necessary to bring the university's subsidy level into line with comparable institutions on the mainland and increase the university's self-reliance, its ability to raise its own revenues. However, we didn't do this aside from also including critical programs to safeguard the well-being of the people of Puerto Rico. So there is the scholarship fund for medical students to incentivize doctors to practice in underserved areas that needs to be rolled out in 2021. And of course, continued progress by the government on setting up and administering the independent UPR scholarship fund for those who have financial needs. On municipal services reform, which continues, the goal of the fiscal plan and the measures that are introduced in calendar 2021 are to meet the needs of the Puerto Rican people amid the realities of declining populations and revenues. Municipalities will need to further exercise fiscal discipline, and the reforms that could be implemented involve consolidation of services such as garbage disposal, road maintenance across municipalities, the implementation of property tax collection reforms to improve the revenues of the municipalities. And of course, we can't forget that there is a need to continue to develop the plans for earthquake recovery and pandemic recovery. Pursuing these measures will allow municipalities to achieve financial sustainability. Next page. So 2021 is going to be, I believe, in a very important year in terms of putting to work the disaster recovery funds. So while all of these other things are happening, there are many, many efforts to put these funds to work. Go to the next page. Disaster relief funds spending has seen a very modest increase in the pace of disbursements since January of 2020. Approximately $144 million was dispersed in permanent work categories, driven primarily by small projects in municipalities for roads, bridges, public buildings, parks, and recreational facilities. Disaster relief funding obligations were slower than projected in fiscal year 20. FEMA only obligated $0.9 billion in FY20, down from earlier forecasts of $3 billion. However, we believe 2021 is likely to be the year where disbursements accelerate and need to accelerate significantly. Large blocks of funding forecast in the fiscal plan were recently announced by President Trump and FEMA. And these funds can accelerate the ability for PREPA and the Department of Education to reform and rebuild. Similarly, of the $10 billion in CDBG-DR funding that has been authorized, $3.2 billion of it has been obligated. Contracts have been awarded for $1.3 billion, and $144 million in funding has been dispersed to date. We'll talk more about this later, but with the CDBG MIT or Mitigation Action Plan now having been drafted, once it's approved by HUD, it could lead to a grant agreement, which could ultimately provide an incremental $8.3 billion in mitigation funding. Next slide. As I alluded to on the previous page, one of the major developments in the last few months was FEMA's announcement of $12.8 billion in agreements for the fixed cost Section 428 estimates for Puerto Rico. This is $10.5 billion for PREPA restoration of the electrical grid and $2.3 billion for the Department of Education to rebuild schools. Both of these will receive a 90% federal share. As we look into 2021, PREPA's already submitted its draft 10-year work plan to FEMA on December 7th, detailing the repair funding. Puerto Rico's Department of Education is expected to submit its work plan by the end of this month. Additionally, there's work to be done in related architectural and engineering works. The Department of Education procurement arm has to begin focusing on setting up a project management office to get the work done that this money allows to be done. Many of these projects are expected to take 10 years or more to complete. So there will also need to be some type of extension requested from FEMA to enable that work to continue. Next page. This just gives you a sense of the CDBG, DR, and MIT funding, what the status of all of it is. What you see in the first two columns is that only part of the funding appropriated has been obligated and dispersed at this time. Of note, the first step towards unlocking the 1.9 billion in CDBG DR funding for electric power, that's the second column from the right, has yet to occur because the filing hasn't been done in the Federal Register by the federal government. Until that, along with several subsequent steps occur, this particular amount of funding will remain unavailable to the government. And as the red box shows, we'll later discuss an action plan for CDBG MIT today. Next slide. I know I've talked about the hurricanes, but we can't forget the earthquakes earlier this year. Starting in December of 2019, the first of thousands of earthquakes struck Puerto Rico, causing significant damage, mostly as you can see here in the west and southwest part of the island. There were 3 earthquakes with magnitudes of 3.0 or more. And as a result of that devastation, 33 municipalities were designated to receive federal aid. Next page. A lot of numbers here. Bottom line, on the table on the left, 18 municipalities have already received $14.9 million from the Emergency Reserve of Puerto Rico to be used for emergency response. On the right side, you'll see that a reprogramming of the government was approved to move $51.4 million from cost share to the Department of Housing for demolition and debris removal. Of that 51.4 million allocated to 5 municipalities, 12.4 million has been dispersed. So 2021 still is a very important year to deal with the immediate emergency needs of clearing the debris and as a result of these earthquakes. Many of these projects will continue. Some of them may be reimbursable under FEMA's public assistance program at a 75% federal cost share. So municipalities will need to submit all appropriate documentation. Similarly, there's another $2 million that's been reprogrammed from OMB state cost share to the P3 authority for demolition and debris removal in 11 other municipalities. To start the rebuilding, an integrated, comprehensive plan has to be developed for the long-term economic reintegration of this region. And then finally, 2021, we begin with where we ended, which is the pandemic. So the final topic I want to update you on, next slide, is the response to COVID, which we continue to have to respond to. It hasn't ended. Although we're very grateful and we know that the first vaccines have arrived on the island, and vaccinations have begun, it is really just the beginning of quite a bit of process. Next page. This reflects the $2.2 billion of the CARES Act funds received by the government, the programs that they've outlined, and the detailed plan that the government has developed to try and mitigate the scarring that we talked about on the economy and the effect of the pandemic. Next page. Puerto Rico, as of December 10th, had already invested 51.4% of these funds into the economy and continues to do so. You see that red line represents Puerto Rico as compared to other states, and Puerto Rico is up at the top in terms of its effectiveness at putting these funds to work. Still, there's quite a bit to be done. Next page. There were also funds allocated in March, prior to the federal government, to help frontline workers in particular and the education system in dealing with this pandemic. Most of these funds, of the $787 million, have already been put to work in the economy in the form of direct payments to self-employed, to small businesses, the frontline workers in hazard pay, support for certain municipalities, and computers and tablets for students and teachers. So the majority of this is done, but there's still a bit to be completed. Let me close by just saying that this pandemic has shone a bright light on the state of the public healthcare system in Puerto Rico and the lack of capital investment made over the past decades in basic upkeep and systems. Ensuring patient access to high quality, affordable healthcare has been one of the priorities as a result of what we see. In both the fiscal year 20 and 21 budgets, funds were set aside for strategic investments in the health system to improve the quality of health. The table at the bottom gives you a summary of where these funds are supposed to be utilized to improve healthcare on the island. And it's critical that 2021 be the year that these monies are put to work. The next page just gives, and it's there for you, you're not supposed to actually have to read it, but for anyone who's interested in what specific facilities and what specific use of the funds was to be made, this is the plan that was developed with each of the hospitals, the CDT centers, the CST centers throughout the island. The certified fiscal plans and budgets, including the federal disaster funding, provide the resources and the strategic plans needed to turn our situation around, to grow the island's economy, to improve our education, healthcare, business environment, and infrastructure. We look forward to working with Governor-elect Pierluisi and the new government and legislature of Puerto Rico. 2021 will be a big year for all of us. Thank you. I turn the meeting back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Natalie. This is a huge amount of information, very important information that that we've just received. Are there questions or comments from the board? And I will be sure to give Omar a chance to say anything he wants to say in particular. But are there any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a question. I've said this before, and I don't want to bog the meeting down, but I think I just want to point out for the record that these forecasts have been consistently wrong over the past several years. And I think it hurts the people of Puerto Rico. And I think we need to do a better job.
Other questions or comments? Omar, you'd like to go ahead?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a brief comment. I know that in the structural reform and fiscal measures, the Oversight Board normally highlights the fact that the government of Puerto Rico has not been able to implement them in a swiftly manner. However, I would really want to highlight from our perspective, particularly for the new board members, that during the last 1.5 years, we have done a great strides in that front, particularly in collaborating with the Oversight Board in a more constant manner, in a more transparent manner, and making sure that we can both move together. Because when we talk about that the government of Puerto Rico has not even implemented this reform and fiscal measures in a very effective or efficient manner, we also have to highlight the fact that we have been facing natural disasters, COVID-19 pandemic, earthquake, that all of that has already put more pressure in the already limited resources that the government has. So again, I think that the government-elect has been quite clear that this is the moment for execution. And from our perspective, we will continue to collaborate with the Oversight Board in that respect.
Thank you, Omar. And we have indeed collaborated on many things. There's been some frictions, but also a great deal of collaboration. And we certainly hope that will only increase in 2021. Other comments or questions from the board? I just have one small comment on an area that the government keeps working on, we keep working on, and that is the permitting issues that were one of the things that were highlighted by the survey that Lizzie presented. Andrew Biggs has made this point over and over. I think we can't make it enough. Ease of doing business in Puerto Rico is a big problem. Puerto Rico, I believe, is 65th in the world and ought to be a lot higher than that. One of the things that struck me about this, about the survey and about the difficulty of getting permits is the extent to which it particularly hits small businesses, that small businesses are the ones that are most hurt. And so I really thank it needs to continue to be a focus, and that's one of the areas where I think real change is possible, difficult but possible. Any other thoughts or comments from the?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just, I would reiterate your response regarding the small business survey. The larger businesses in Puerto Rico have the resources to handle administrative delays. They are in a better position to negotiate deals on corporate taxes. It is, as you said, the smaller businesses which really suffer from the poor business environment in Puerto Rico. And most large businesses start as small businesses. So if you want to be building the economy of Puerto Rico, you need to give or provide fertile ground for small businesses to grow. But the way the system is set up now, it essentially favors established larger businesses that can work within that environment, but makes it much more difficult for small businesses to get ahead. So this is the problem is not simply the poor business environment, but also I think the lack of progress over the years in addressing this. And this precedes the existence of the board, that people are well aware of these problems, but for year upon year, things like permitting really have not gotten addressed. And so I think it's important to say not just we need to address it, but to try to understand why have past efforts to address permitting and other reforms, why have they failed, and then what do we actually need to do to move forward and make them succeed this time.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think Betty has a comment or a question as well.
Actually, a comment to follow up on that issue, stating that large businesses have the capacity, and I'm assuming, and I think I'm right, small businesses are usually within the island, individuals within the island. So there's a big difference of island focused individuals versus external. The other part that I thought was striking was few financial options. Anytime you have, particularly for small businesses, if you limit the few financial options, then what you're in essence doing is creating a cycle that almost forces the small businesses to close down. I mean, the large businesses not only have the capacity to wait, have the capacity to leverage their in many cases, their connections, networking, partnerships. And so the thing that was striking for me was that issue of few financial options for small businesses.
It is, I think, a very, very big issue and concern. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, thanks. This was a very helpful discussion. We can now move on to our fourth agenda item, which is reapportionments and reprogrammings. And I believe that Ginorli Maldonado will be doing that presentation. Yeah, I see her.
Thank you, Chairman Skeel. Good morning, everyone. We now present for the board's action a series of recommendations on reapportionments from the government of Puerto Rico, as shown in exhibit here, exhibit 1. I'm going to highlight the following reapportionments. On the first page, request number 1, assignments under the custody of Hacienda. The agency is requesting a fund recognition and a budget increase to deposit 35% of the sales of electronic lottery tickets to be distributed to the CRIM by provision of Law 10 of 1981 for their operations and municipal improvements. The recommendation is to approve the request as sufficient documentation was provided and the appropriation was not previously budgeted. On that same page, request number 6, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is requesting a reapportionment of $5.9 million from payroll of the adult program into purchase services to cover an increase in primas for the full year of 2021, and the food costs of the inmate population, among other services. The agency provided payroll projections that support the projected underspending in payroll. As such, the recommendation is to approve this request. Can you go to the next page, please? Request number 12, the Department of Health is requesting a special revenue fund increase of $135,000 for the school lunch programs. Now, this revenue comes from the school cafeteria inspections performed by for the Department of Education. At the time that the request came in, the agency confirmed no inspections have been made from August to December, thus no revenue to recognize. The agency did not provide revenue projections considering inspection frequency changes due to school closures. As such, the recommendation is to deny this request. Next page, please. Request number 24, the Department of Transportation and Public Works is requesting $6.7 million for their weeding and maintenance of green areas around the highways. The government, with this request, proposed to use unallocated CapEx under the custody of FOMB as the source of funds to cover these expenditures. The recommendation is to approve this request as supporting documentation and a valid source of fund was provided. Can you go to the next page, please? Thank you. And lastly, request number 32, the State Historic Preservation Office requested a fund release of prior year funds in the amount of $63,000 to pay for tree grade services that were provided in June of 2020. These funds correspond to fiscal year 2018 emergency reserve funds. The recommendation is to approve the request using current emergency reserve funds. This concludes my presentation, unless there are any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Janorli. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Looks like Omar has a question or comment.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have a question. This is out of curiosity. Does the Oversight Board has an internal procedure that for small quantities reprogramming, we can have like an expedited process? Because if you look at number 19 and 20, we're talking about reprogramming requests about around $13,000 and $4,000. So again, do we have a process that would allow the government of Puerto Rico to be a little bit more to be able to expedite this process? So that's a question.
Thanks, Omar. I'll try and answer. To date, our council has advised us that the law requires the board to review each one of them, and there's no flexibility in the way the law was written with regard to even delegating some of this. So unfortunately, at this point, we've not found a way to provide that kind of flexibility because of the way the law is written.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. And again, this is my question stems from the experience that we have had since the establishment of PROMESA, and this is more for the new board members. The fact that this is a management board as opposed to the control board has a history in the congressional process. The government of Puerto Rico has been criticized for lack of execution, and I will accept that in many instances, yes, the government has not been able to execute with the limited resources and in the time frame expected by the Oversight Board. However, we cannot have a straitjacket. In many instances, going through a reprogramming process for $4,000 that the local OGP should be able to handle, obviously within the guardrails established by the Oversight Board, because we're not saying that we will not follow the process. So again, I think that we will need a leeway, and the fact that we have new blood in the Oversight Board, new perspective, many of you have a strong background on management. So I think, again, it is something that the government-elect has emphasized, the fact that we don't want a straitjacket, we don't want the past experience that have maybe break the trust or have damage the working relationship, to judge the future and allow the government of Puerto Rico to have the leeway. So again, I just want to avail myself this moment, the fact that we have new board members, because in the past we have always said the Oversight Board should set the size of the room, and should allow the government of Puerto Rico to arrange or rearrange the furniture within those guardrails, within those four corners. So I think that I would invite the new oversight board and the new members to think about it, because I think that in the end, to the extent that the people of Puerto Rico, the government of Puerto Rico has a workable government with the ability to determine the public policy within those guardrails established by the oversight board, we will be better off. Not only the government of Puerto Rico, the people of Puerto Rico, and all of our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. We will certainly look into this and think about it. Where we do have flexibility to streamline things, we have streamlined things, as with the contracting process. And so we certainly will take your concern to heart and consider whether we have flexibility or whether we don't have flexibility. Betty, I think you had a question on that.
Sure. Just to respond to Omar, since you referenced as a new member, I think, and I'm going to reference my role as commissioner in the state as an SEA. I think your point is well taken, because of the fact that ultimately you want to build capacity. And the only way that I know how to build capacity is, you're absolutely right, looking at the space within the room. But to have somebody externally come in and rearrange the furniture that how you want this room to look like, is critical. So I just want you to know that I hear you, and as a new board member, I totally am in support of having Puerto Rico build capacity and make it so that it's very much Puerto Rico. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Betty. Justin?
Really appreciate Dr. Rosa's remarks. As many of you know, I've been a proponent of the board acting as board and setting broad parameters and letting Puerto Rico's duly elected officials govern. So I could not agree more. We had a discussion last month about Christmas bonuses that I thought was ridiculous for the board to be meddling in. So I could not agree more, and I'm really glad we are getting new blood on the board so that we can empower Puerto Rico's duly elected officials to govern.
Any other questions or comments from the board? I'll just say that there obviously is a trade-off here. If Puerto Rico's government had not been dysfunctional and we hadn't had the problems that we've had over the last over a decade, there wouldn't be a need for an oversight board on the one hand, but on the other hand, we do want to build capacity and we want to give the government room. And we also are constrained by the law in certain places. This is one area, I think, where we have a little less flexibility than we have in other areas, but we certainly will take all of this into consideration. And I think there is a strong sentiment in favor of, to use Betty's words, building capacity and enabling the government to build capacity. It looks like John has a question or a comment as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Omar, I certainly understand, your comments and concerns, and certainly, micromanaging is not something that I want to do. Now, one thing that I really look forward to working with you on, though, is really helping to establish some of those fiscal controls within government. It concerns me that we're so far delinquent on audited financial statements and some of these other things. But as has been discussed, I think as that capacity is built and as we move along this path together, certainly I'd be supportive of allowing, greater flexibility to the extent we can within the law. But as Chairman Skill mentioned, it is pretty restrictive on what we can and can't do. I'm not an expert on that, certainly by any stretch of the imagination, but just to let you know that I really want to work with you, but I understand that the reprogramming is part of the law. And so we are somewhat limited with what we can do, but where we can, as we're taking those steps together, we certainly look forward to working with you.
Thanks. And it has been a very collaborative relationship as
Chairman,
absolutely. Go ahead.
just a final comment, and definitely I want to highlight and stress what you just mentioned. this has been collaborated, and I don't want my words to be taken as a disrespect to the oversight board. No, you know that we have been able to collaborate and to speak about our differences. But for the new board members, I agree. This is one of the areas in which Promesa is quite clear as to reprogramming. But I believe that we have increased that threshold by certifying a fiscal plan and a budget at such granular detail, to the extent that we have a budget that is so expanded, to the extent that we have a fiscal plan that goes into that micromanagement of public policy. Definitely we'll have a straitjacket, and then every single step of the way we will have to go back, and it will be more complicated. But to the extent that we're now entering a new calendar year, we'll have the revision mandated by Promesa to the fiscal plan, and the opportunity to have a new budget that would allow the new elected government to execute its public policy. I think that we have a great opportunity. I know that we have to comply with the law. You know me, as a legal professional, I'm always will follow the law, and will always believe in internal controls to monitor and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse of taxpayers' money. That I will always agree to it. But again, I think that we have an opportunity. Let's talk with through our teams and our advisors to see how we can provide that leeway and not necessarily be in that straitjacket position. But again, thank you all for your comments, and we look forward to continue to collaborate.
Thank you, Omar. Any last comments or questions before hopefully we move? Do we have a motion that we approve these reapportionments from the board?
Mr.
So
Chairman,
moved.
oh, yes, seconded.
Was that Justin? Somebody moved, hopefully Jaime, and John seconded. So once again, I'll take a voice vote. First yes, then no, then any abstentions. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Yeah.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. I believe it was unanimously. So we can now move to the fifth item on our agenda, and that is certification of the government of Puerto Rico's action plan for the Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Program. A little bit of a mouthful. As just a quick background on this, a federal notice in January of this year that relates to special conditions to program risks requires that the Puerto Rico Department of Housing as the grantee submit an MIT action plan for certification to the oversight board. And I believe that Ricardo Fuentes is going to be back and is going to explain this to us and tell us about it.
Thank you, Chairman. Move to the next slide, please. So as you know, Congress has appropriated $20.2 billion in CDBG-DR and CDBG-MIT funds for Puerto Rico. As shown in the right-hand visual, these funds were allocated for different purposes and are in different stages of HUD approval processes. At the moment, the Commonwealth only has access to $3.2 billion that come from the $10 billion in CDBG-DR funds shown in the bottom right triangle. Of the available funds, as Natalie mentioned, the government has dispersed approximately 5%, or a little over $144 million. As part of the special conditions imposed on Puerto Rico to access these funds, FOMB must certify that the action plan and any related budgets are consistent with any reasonably related provisions of the applicable FOMB certified budgets and fiscal plans. Today, we will be discussing the certification of the action plan for the $8.3 billion in CDBG MIT funds, or the upper triangle in the visual. Next slide, please. Yeah. Between the months of May and November, the Department of Housing conducted stakeholder engagement efforts to consult with municipalities, academia, NGOs, and other government agencies to gain a community-driven understanding of Puerto Rico's mitigation needs and use this understanding to design the action plan. On December 3rd, FOMB received the CDBG MIT action plan for formal review and certification in compliance with HUD requirements contained in Federal Register notice published in January of this year. Next slide. The objective of the action plan is to increase Puerto Rico's resiliency to disasters. And with this, we refer to enhancing the ability of communities to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and more successfully adapt to actual or potential adverse events in a timely and efficient manner, including the restoration and improvement of basic functions and structures. In sum, the point of mitigation is to avoid the loss of life, the destruction of property and land, and the exorbitant cost of rebuilding what was torn apart. Next slide. The Department of Housing evaluated 18 possible threats, color-coded in the bottom of the accompanying visual, including potential threats such as hurricane winds, flooding, landslides, earthquakes, among others. Using historical data to determine the likelihood of occurrence in the Caribbean, the agency conducted a detailed risk assessment. The risk assessment was also conducted at the municipal level using the most granular data available to determine top risks in different regions. As is illustrated in the risk assessment map, the majority of the island is predominantly at risk to hurricane winds and flooding, with the exception of the southwest, which is at risk to earthquakes, and the western end of the island's mountainous center, which is mostly at risk to landslides. The action plan also incorporates the FEMA Lifelines framework, which recognizes that communities depend on a network of interdependent systems that involve public and private entities, including everything from utilities to hospitals or supermarkets. At any point along a lifeline, a failure can result in cascading failures in other directions. The 7 lifelines are, are safety and security, protection from and proper disposal of hazardous materials, energy, food, water, and sheltering, health and medical services, communications, and transportations. Next slide. Now, based on the risk assessment and the FEMA Lifelines framework, the action plan intends to distribute the CDBG MIT funds through 7 programs grouped in 4 categories, which are planning, infrastructure, housing, and multi-sector support. Entities eligible to apply for funding vary by program and include units of local government, such as municipalities, government of Puerto Rico agencies, authorities, trusts, or boards, community-based development organizations and private nonprofits, NGOs and other nonprofit entities, and for-profit businesses. A summary of each of the key programs in the action plan are included in your materials. Next slide. The team has found that the proposed CDBG MIT action plan is generally consistent with the fiscal plan and budget. The action plan's planning programs will provide support for the CDBG-DR GeoFrame program, which is consistent with the property reform sections of the fiscal plan's ease of doing business structural reform. The fiscal plan also assumes these funds will be fully utilized and their impact has already been incorporated into macroeconomic and financial projections. The fiscal plan's 30-year macroeconomic projections do not incorporate the potential impact of future hurricanes, even though the likelihood of major storms remains high. Therefore, increasing the island's resiliency to natural disasters gains even more importance. It is critical to minimize the socioeconomic impact of future disasters to avoid significant fiscal challenges in the future. Regarding potential recommendations that may be provided to the Department of Housing, it should be noted that there has been concern over the pace of disbursements in CDBG-DR funds. The past months have seen a slight acceleration. As you can see in the bottom table, average monthly disbursements have grown from a little over 300,000 a month between February and October 2019 to an average of over 15 million per month between May and November 2020. It might still not be the pace many were expecting, but it is certainly a sign of progress. The team is recommending that the action plan certification include the recommendation of publishing a CDBG-DR MIT transparency portal, similar to Core 3's transparency portal. Such a portal would provide citizens and stakeholders with visibility into the progress being made, where funds are flowing, for example, to which programs or which subrecipients, and where the pace of disbursements may be lagging. This would promote transparency and accountability over the use of these vital resources. Based on the foregoing presentation, we recommend that the board approve the resolution attached as Exhibit 2 hereto, certifying that the action plan and related budget are consistent with any related provisions of the fiscal plan and budget for the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico as certified on May 27 and June 30, 2020, respectively, and directing the board's executive director to provide the Commonwealth with the recommendations and observations set forth in the letter attached as Exhibit 2 hereto.
Thank you, Ricardo. Are there any questions from or comments from the board about these recommendations? Omar?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you, Ricardo, for this excellent presentation and for your work with this matter. I think that, again, I would like to echo the recommendations. I think that the recommendations are on point, and based on our experience at Core 3 and with the development on the transparency portal, we totally agree, and we would like to be a tool to help you to get that goal in place. And last but not least, I will also appreciate and would like to thank the work of the Oversight Board. If we have been able during the last couple of disasters, pandemia, earthquakes, and now with the recovery funding, we have been able to move forward because the Oversight Board has support. So again, I would like to commend the work of Ricardo and the personnel of the Oversight Board in this matter, because this is one of the funding, one of the tranches, one of the most important tranches on the CDBG, the art funding. So again, thank you for your collaboration and your support.
Thank you, and thank you as well for Omar for y'all's work on this. Do I have a motion from the board to approve the resolution certifying the CDBG MIT action plan?
So moved. So moved.
Thank you, Andrew. Second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, John. As usual, I'll first ask for those in favor, then ask for any opposed, and then ask for any abstentions. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The measure, I think, passes unanimously. Thanks, Ricardo, and thanks to the staff generally. So the sixth item on our agenda is the UHY BDO financial examination phase 2 report. So the report on a BDO examination, and I believe Natalie is going to present that.
In part, Mr. Chairman. In August of 2019, Congress urged the Oversight Board to determine whether the integrity of any of the services rendered by BDO Puerto Rico were impaired or otherwise affected by alleged fraudulent or illegal activities of the firm's former managing partner as charged by federal authorities and subsequent actions taken by the Commonwealth government. To that effect, the Oversight Board engaged UHY to conduct an independent financial examination of the audit, accounting, and other services performed by BDO Puerto Rico since 2016 under multiple contracts with the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and its instrumentalities. The focus of the examination has been exclusively on a financial nature. Legal actions or remedies are not within the scope of the investigation and are the responsibility of law enforcement authorities. The financial examination was divided into two phases. First, phase 1 evaluated the auditing services, and second, phase 2 focused on other consulting services. In July of 2020, the Oversight Board issued UHY's phase 1 report, and you can find that on our website, concluding that UHY did not note any matters indicating that BDO Puerto Rico's integrity in any of the audits inspected was impaired or otherwise affected by the alleged activities of its former managing partner or the Commonwealth government's subsequent actions. So now I will ask Jack Regan, partner at UHY, to provide a brief presentation to the board on the results of the phase 2 examination. Jack?
Good morning, members of the of the board and executive director, thank you for inviting me today to brief you on the results of our work. I wanted to talk a little bit to you about UHY, the scope of our work, the contract specifically we've reviewed, the results, and then finally just a few future considerations. UHY is a full service accounting and auditing and tax firm. Depending on the day and the metric, we're somewhere between the 25th and the 35th largest in the United States. We do have international affiliates, one of which is located in San Juan. However, the San Juan office did not have any involvement with the procedures that we've performed. As the executive director indicated, we were engaged to review contracts between BDO Puerto Rico and the Commonwealth. Original first phase, actually the total number of contracts were 99 contracts and about $100 million worth of contract value. In phase one, we reviewed the 5 audit contracts for fiscal 17 that one of the board members earlier was talking about some of the delays in the audited financial statements. We did phase one to address those so that it could facilitate the issuance of the 2017 audited financial statements. Then we moved on to, because of the satisfactory results there, we recommended, rather than looking at the remaining 94 contracts, to look at a smaller subset. So we looked at the ones over $500,000. Between the original 5 that we looked at, the 5 and the remaining ones we looked at here today, that I'm going to report on, we looked at approximately 16 of the 99 contracts and got to almost 40% of the total contract value. So I feel like we got a pretty good scoping exercise. We specifically evaluated BDO's performance with respect to what they were supposed to deliver on the contracts, progress, timelines, looked at the milestones, and then any other deliverables or unique requirements within the contracts. Go to the next slide. Oops, can we go to the next slide? Overall, what we were trying to do was to determine whether the integrity of the services provided by BDO was impaired or otherwise affected by the alleged fraudulent activities of the former managing partner. The next slide, you can see the 11 contracts that we looked at: Education, Treasury, AFOF, Health Insurance Administration, OMB, and PREPA. As you can imagine, with BDO being a professional services firm, a lot of those arrived around accounting services and consulting services. So again, overall, we got to almost 40% of the total contract value between the 2 phases. Next slide. The results of our work, we can go to the next slide. The results of our work, we did not find any matters indicating that BDO's integrity of any of the services rendered was impaired or otherwise affected by the alleged activities of its former managing partner. And we didn't find any instances where the services rendered weren't executed in accordance with the contract scope, expected deliverables, timelines, milestones, or professional standards. So, we found in phase 2 what we expected, sort of what we suspected based on the results of phase 1. The executive director was a forceful advocate on behalf of the Commonwealth as we were talking and briefing congressional staff at the end of phase 1, indicating that based on the results of phase 1, phase 2 wasn't necessary, but congressional staff insisted on doing at least something over the consulting contracts, which is why we narrowed the scope down. We went through, had lots of meetings with Commonwealth staff. We looked at every available invoice and purchase order and all the documentation to see the chain of events in terms of the delivery of the professional services. And again, feel like while the procurement of the contractual services were allegedly impaired, at least the delivery does not appear to have been impaired. We can go to the next slide. We wouldn't be an audit that I led if I didn't at least find something I guess that's one of the blessings or the curse of having the auditor gene. But in 4 of the 4 contracts we looked at Treasury, each of those contracts had a maximum monthly amount of disbursement that could not be exceeded. And we saw instances where that maximum monthly amount was exceeded in 4 of the 4 contracts. However, as we looked at the total of the invoices that were paid and total contract payments made, the contract ceiling was never exceeded. So in my mind, what happened was some underages in 1 month were paid as overages in another month. However, it did exceed the contractual amount, so we did have to report that. We did see 2 instances as we were lining up the names of all the employees of BDO that were listed on the invoices. We did see 2 BDO invoices where it appeared that an employee was billed twice in those months. It was a nominal amount, but we did see what appeared to be just a clerical error in those because we did not see any pervasive pattern on those. And finally, we did see, due to some turnover at some entities, it was difficult to find somebody either in the procurement shop or in the accounting shop who was familiar with the actual contract that had been serviced, had been rendered, to be able to speak authoritatively about how that contract was managed. And, certainly a recommendation that we have as we have been looking through both phases of this contract is that the Commonwealth could use stronger procedures in its contractor management oversight process, formalizing some of that documentation around status meetings or other manners of monitoring the services to be provided. And with that, I'll just extend my thanks to the board again for your oversight on this project, to the executive director for her continued input and support, and finally to your staff, especially Carlos Robles, who was my contract manager on this one. And if you need some advice or recommendations on how to execute proper contractor oversight, Carlos is your man. He did an excellent job of keeping us on the straight and narrow, status meetings, status reports, all that sort of stuff. He can definitely provide you with ideas on how to do that. And I'll entertain any questions that the board or the executive director might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack, for what obviously was a very careful investigation. Are there questions or comments from the board? Don't see or hear any. So thank you very much again for, as I just said, what obviously was a very careful investigation. So this, I'm sorry.
I know, just saying thank you.
Thanks again, Jack. So this brings us to the 7th and last substantive item on our agenda, and that is public comments, which I think Natalie will serve as quarterback for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have quite a few. I'm going to try and group a couple of them. One that I want to put out there right away, people are asking where on our website can they find the answers to the questions that have been given in past board meetings. So I want to direct you to find the comments on our website under FOMB 22nd Public Board Meeting Public Commentary. Or you can click on, if I read this to you, it won't make any sense. It's about 700 different letters. So let me just say, look on the website under FOMB 22nd Public Board Meeting Public Commentary. Now to the substantive questions. Jeb Fries, Carmen Quinones asks, why is it taking so long to restructure PREPA and give some economic relief to financially strapped individual bondholders, including Puerto Ricans? Thank you, Jeb. The Oversight Board had reached a consensual agreement with bondholders last year, but asked the U.S. District Court to halt the process in March when it became clear that the COVID pandemic would severely affect the economy. We have resumed discussions with creditors after a comprehensive assessment of the effects of the recent earthquakes and the pandemic on the economic outlook. However, significant progress has been made even in the absence of completing that restructuring to provide more reliable, more affordable, and cleaner electricity for households and businesses on the island, and to support the economic growth projections in the fiscal plan. Puerto Rico now has an efficient, independent energy regulator, and the P3 authority reached a historic agreement with Luma Energy to transfer PREPA's transmission and distribution system to private management, which should help make energy supply more resilient and more reliable. The P3 authority has also begun the process of transferring energy generation to private management. So the transformation is making progress, and we expect, as I said earlier today, to complete the exit of bankruptcy for PREPA in the calendar year 2021. Leonard Kratzer, has two questions. First, in the PRIDCO 2020 Certified Fiscal Plan, the board required PRIDCO to submit to the board on September 30th a new lease agreement template due to the numerous problems and issues found with their current processes. As of the last board meeting, it had still not been submitted. Has it yet been submitted? If not, what is the board doing to require PRIDCO to comply with your direct order to submit a new template? So, Mr. Kratzer, I'm happy to say that the lease agreement has been submitted by PRIDCO and it will be revised. We're engaged in discussions with PRIDCO on the subject and on other initiatives that also need to be completed in the fiscal plan with the new PRIDCO management that will be held in January when the new government is in place. Mr. Kratzer also writes, has the board initiated any internal investigations into the actions of PRIDCO employees concerning lease agreement problems, real estate valuation fraud, corruption, mismanagement, and other issues in consideration that many of the aforementioned have been revealed in the press at PuertoRicoExpose.com. So, Mr. Kratzer, we are not a law enforcement agency. We're doing everything possible to create the capacity to avoid those types of things to the extent that they are occurring. And when we do, when we do identify any illicit activity, or we believe there's been illicit activity, we do refer the information to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. Mr. Hennigan, Andrew Hennigan, has three questions, all related to McKinsey. First, how much in fees has the Oversight Board compensated McKinsey and or any of its affiliates for its consulting services related to non-Title III entities, such as PRASA, since December 2016 to the present? So these figures are all available on our website from our financial statements. However, to date, for the 4 years, consulting services since December 2016 to the present, McKinsey has earned approximately $45 million in non-Title III fees. Second question, how much in fees did the Oversight Board compensate McKinsey or any of its affiliates for its consulting services related to Title III or Title VI entities from December 2006 through May of 2017, prior to the Commonwealth's filing of its petition for Title III protection? Mr. Hennigan, the way we keep our ledgers, if it was prior to Title III, then it would have been included in the preliminary number that I gave you earlier. It would be in the Oversight Board financial statement. So that would be included in the $45 million that I just described to you, pre-Title III. I'm not sure, you only asked for the period through 2017, but I'll answer the question for total for the period of the 4 years for Title III. And these are again available through the public fee examiner reports to the U.S. District Court for the District of Puerto Rico. Through October, the fee examiner reports over 4 years for all Title III related work, Commonwealth, PBA, ERS, PREPA, and so on. It is approximately $86 million. Question 3, with regard to McKinsey or any of its affiliates, did McKinsey or any of its affiliates provide consulting services to the government of Puerto Rico or any of its instrumentalities prior to December 2016? If so, did McKinsey or one of its affiliates receive compensation in relation to those services? I don't have an answer to that. I'd have to refer that to the government of Puerto Rico. I don't know what happened before 2016. Omar, you don't.
Thank you, Natalie. We will have to, I don't have the information readily available, but we'll look into it and we'll provide it.
Thank you. Kate Long, greetings. I asked this question at the last public meeting and it was not answered that I am aware of. The May 2020 fiscal plan shows an expense of approximately 2.4 billion of PAYGO pension costs per year in the general fund, but there are payments due from municipalities and public corporations that should reduce the amount charged to the general fund of about 500 to 700 million per year, netting out PAYGO expenses of non-general fund entities. Can you please provide a breakdown of annual PAYGO costs attributable to the general fund, municipalities, and public corporations for fiscal year 2021? Also, can you ask the Title III court to remove the confidentiality restrictions on AMBEC's pension discovery? It is unclear why it is necessary to hide this information about a public entity. So first, Ms. Long, indeed, we answered the question. Again, it appears to be hard to find. I'll have to make that easier, but it is on the website under FOMB 22nd Public Board Meeting Public Commentary. And the answer basically is that the central government does not fund PAYGO for public corporations or municipalities. In fact, to a large degree, that was the issue that was resolved in court with Act 29, and the board defended that case and won. The Oversight Board has continued to assure that all entities, and we review it monthly to make sure that everyone is caught up on their PAYGO payments. So the government budget includes 2.6 billion for pension payments, and then as a general fund expense, and then it has a special revenue fund revenue of about 300 million for those different revenues that are collected in terms of reimbursements from municipalities and government entities. So net is about 2.3. Clifford M. Webb, just a minute. Clifford M. Webb, president of Greenbrier Capital Corporation, says, on February 11th, 2020, the FOMB sent a letter to the PREPA Governing Board requiring PREPA to, quote, seek the renegotiation of existing shovel-ready renewable energy power purchase agreements with the objective of lowering current operating costs and deploying renewable resources expeditiously, unquote. The FOMB criticized PREPA for not having entered into any contracts yet to enable renewable generation, quote, thus delaying the benefits to ratepayers from lower cost generation and jeopardizing the credibility of Puerto Rico as a destination for renewable energy investments, unquote. The letter stressed that, quote, every day the deployment of renewable resources is delayed is an additional day PREPA's ratepayers are deprived of the environmental and economic benefits these resources provide, unquote. The FOMB approved the term sheet contract prices negotiated between PREPA and the projects. Then in May 2020, with the support of Governor Vasquez's administration, the PREPA Governing Board approved 16 power purchase agreements totaling 593 megawatts of generation, which were subsequently sanctioned by the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau, of which the new contract prices offered by the projects were lower than FOMB approved prices. However, in a complete reversal from its February 11th letter, Mr. Webb considers the FOMB notified PREPA on August 17th that it would only approve 150 megawatts worth of generation out of the 593 megawatts of shovel-ready projects agreed to by all the relevant Puerto Rico government entities. For the FOMB to deny the long negotiated contracts by kicking the can down the road by ordering another RFP, new projects and bidding could take 3 to 4 years to obtain project sites, permits, construction of required transmission infrastructure, and approvals to build their projects. There was and is no economic, business, financial, or ratepayer benefit from the FOMB denying or delaying the contracts that FOMB lobbied so hard to have PREPA execute, thereby saving valuable time in order to obtain the significant economic benefits with the investment, jobs, and tax base offered by these projects. Ironically, this decision has further delayed a process that for many of these projects started almost a decade ago and seems contrary to the FOMB's articulated concern and goals regarding the negative impact of further delays on the island's transition to renewables consistent with current law, the IRP, and the economic benefits supporting a road to the financial independence of Puerto Rico. The question, Mr. Webb, the question before the FOMB is whether there is serious consideration among its members, particularly with the reconstituted FOMB and its newly appointed board members, to reconsider its questionable past decision and to move forward to approve the shovel-ready renewable energy projects before it as PREPA and the government of Puerto Rico have repeatedly requested. Thank you, Mr. Webb. So again, I answered this last time and I urge you to take a look. The Oversight Board is completely supportive. The certified fiscal plan reflects the energy policy of Puerto Rico with regard to renewable energy generation. And there should be no doubt that the board supports that. The previous board, and I can assume the new board. That said, the goal of the certified fiscal plan is to have cleaner, more reliable, more affordable energy. And the Oversight Board will continue to work with PREPA and the Puerto Rico government on the transformation as a whole. Increasing renewable energy is an important part of the transformation, as well as a requirement of Puerto Rico Act 17-2918. But PREPA must deliver that renewable energy at reasonable and affordable prices. The scope of the contracts initially proposed by PREPA resulted in higher electricity rates than allowed under the certified fiscal plan. Those contracts were also not procured in a competitive fashion. Therefore, the Oversight Board took a decision, the previous Oversight Board took a decision to ask PREPA to look at which of the contracts and to rank the contracts under transparent criteria to encourage those that were truly shovel ready, because PREPA had said they were not all truly shovel ready, and to limit at that price, the higher price, higher than the fiscal plan, to limit the development to 150 megawatts at this time and immediately pursue competitive and transparent procurement of all the remaining resources required under law, under Puerto Rico energy policy and under the fiscal plan. PREPA has not yet delivered the 150 megawatts, and I will take it to my board in the next meeting if they would like to relook at their decision, relook at the board's decision of the past, but to date we have not done that. We are convinced though that a transparent and competitive procurement would provide the best outcome for renewables on the island and put PREPA back on track to complying with its renewable targets and establish the framework for the future. Petros Volgaris says, during the last public meeting, you were asked about exchanging current GOPBA debt into solely a contingent value instrument and responded by saying that an exchange like that had never likely occurred before. Well, there has never been a default like Puerto Rico's before, says Petros. Wouldn't an increase in the size of a CVI significantly bridge the bid-ask between bondholders and the board by eliminating the fighting over revenue forecasts going out for 30 years? Wouldn't this help Puerto Rico exit bankruptcy faster? Mr. Volgaris, that is the exact reason that the board and the government have agreed to put a CVI into that last proposal that would allow the creditors to benefit from any upside of the Puerto Rico recovery not projected beyond any projections in the certified fiscal plan. It's in the CVI and it is one of the pieces of discussion in the mediation, which, as you know, is confidential. So we are hopeful. All I can say is that we're hopeful that we have a successful mediation and we are able to achieve as consensual a possible exit from bankruptcy in a sustainable fashion as possible. Renato Gonzalez says, good day. For how long will the FOMB delay the application of Act 80, the early retirement laws? Do we have to wait 6 months for anything to happen? Thanks. So as we described last meeting, the Law 80 was signed into law without sufficient analysis of how much those laws would cost and where the savings would come from to pay for those incremental costs. And the analysis is mandated under PROMESA, and it's best practice in governance. It's why you have CBO and budget offices that score, that develop cost for legislation prior to its being adopted. Even after repeated exchanges, I understand the frustration and I apologize for the frustration. Even after repeated exchanges, we're not quite there in terms of receiving the government's complete analysis of what the actual expected cost will be. The government is doing more work and is currently continuing to analyze the cost of Law 80 as well as Law 81 and 82. And the board has said previously, the public employees should not rely on the additional benefits provided under these laws unless and until the fiscal issues have been resolved. They haven't to date, but I don't have a time frame for you. All I know is that the government will be working, continue to work with us closely on it. Last question. Gregory Moore asks, why not just terminate the PREDCO RSA, which will cost $307 million, and just redeem the Pridco bonds at a cost of around $175 million. Instead of Pridco cash going to pay Pridco bonds, the excess cash could flow to the general fund. All Pridco bonds could be redeemed with 30 days notice. Mr. Medina, who has some experience with Pridco, might have some thoughts on how excess cash from redeeming the bonds could be deployed in Puerto Rico to increase business. So we welcome, as our chairman has said, Mr. Medina joining the board, and he has great experience in this area. We will be listening to his views. The Pridco fiscal plan basically establishes that there has to be some work done before anyone can determine what and how to deal with the debt. There's a series of feasibility studies that should give us a view as to how much monies are necessary to either sell, improve, or maintain the existing Pridco inventory of buildings, which, as everyone knows, is one of the key economic tools to attracting investors to the island. Once those studies are done, the government is doing them, we'll have more insight into the long-term operations, and we'll be able to reasonably forecast the revenues, the expenses, and the sustainable level of debt. Mr. Medina will be, I'm sure, appointed shortly, within days, and he will be a part of that conversation along with all of the board members here today. That study is a little bit overdue, so it should become a priority for early 2021, and we should be getting some answers soon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Natalie, and thanks to everyone who had comments and questions. We appreciate those, and they help us to do the job that Congress has given us to do. Last item on the agenda is any other matters that any board member would like to raise. Is there anything else, any other issues or any other comments? It looks like Omar would like to raise an issue or make a comment.
Just make a comment, Mr. Chairman. As we approach the end of year 2020 and the end of this 4-year term in which we have shared this awkward relationship or awkward or sui generis power sharing agreement with the Oversight Board, I would like to take an unusual step, and today I will not necessarily highlight the differences, but I would like to highlight those areas in which we have been able to collaborate. I know that I am fully cognizant of the difficult job and the hard job that each board member has on their plate. I will avail myself of this moment to thank you, each one of you, as well as the past Oversight Board members and the new board members also, because they have taken the challenge. They have enough courage in their heart and enough commitment with their job to make sure that they're available for the best interest of the people of Puerto Rico. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And more importantly, my counterpart each day, Miss Natalie Yaresco, which I believe has always had the most difficult job and one of those that it is very complicated to understand. But again, I appreciate every single effort that you have made in the best interest of the people of Puerto Rico to achieve fiscal responsibility, to make sure that we are able to pave the way to get access to the capital markets, and more importantly, to provide that economic development that the people of Puerto Rico want to see, and that we're able to be back on our feet. To the people of Puerto Rico, again, I'm always optimistic, and yes, we have faced many challenges during the last 4 years. But again, I always believe that the best days of Puerto Rico are ahead, and we're at that juncture in which I would expect, and I will continue, at least to give from my perspective, that degree of collaboration that all the people of Puerto Rico and all the American citizens that reside on our island expect from us. So again, I just would like to avail myself in this end of the year to congratulate the Oversight Board, and also because at the end of this year, as we approach this Christmas season, that for Puerto Ricans are one of the best seasons and one of those areas, one of those moments in the year that we want to be together. Again, I think that the best words that I have to express to the Oversight Board, despite of differences, is muchas gracias por su trabajo. Thank you for your commitment. And again, we haven't obstacle bust all the challenges that we have in front of us, but I'm optimistic that we'll be able to do so with the collaboration of the new board members that we have today, and also Mr. Medina that will be joining soon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Best wishes to you, your family, and the rest of the board members. I wish you the best wishes for the new year, and happy holidays with your family. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar, for that characteristically gracious statement, which I believe sets exactly the right tone. The importance of continuing to collaborate. This will only get the job done that we need to get done so that the board can disappear, and you need to do, the elected officials of Puerto Rico, not disappearing, going on forever, if we work together. We each have an important role, and the more we can collaborate, the more progress we'll make. So I thank you very much for that statement. And I also make the same holiday wishes for you and your family, and for the governor and the governor-elect and the other elected officials of Puerto Rico as well. We have the same vision, the same objective. And I'm hoping, after a very difficult 2020 for everybody in this country and in the world, that 2021 is going to be a much happier, more successful year. So we've completed everything on our agenda. I should note before go ahead, Justin.
I just wanted to say to Mr. Marrero, thank you for everything you do. You're probably the hardest working guy in Puerto Rico. And I, for one, and I know my colleagues would agree, was really pleased to know that you're going to be continuing on in your role in the new administration. So thank you for everything you do as well.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin, and we absolutely are thrilled that you will be continuing on, Omar. So let me note before we close the meeting that there will be a press conference immediately after the meeting. We'll start in the next couple of minutes, so be aware of that for everybody who might be interested in that. I believe there are no further matters to cover, so let me move that we adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second from the board?
I second.
Thank you, Justin. We certainly didn't want the meeting to go on
That was
forever.
Controversial.
Yeah, this is tricky. I was a little worried about this one, but I'm encouraged that we have a second. And I will, per usual, ask for a voice vote on this motion. All in favor, please say yes.
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 Any opposed? Any abstaining? I didn't think anybody would be opposed. Thanks again to everybody for a very productive meeting. Welcome again to Betty and John, who, as you can already tell, are going to be a huge addition to the board. And we look forward to welcoming Antonio hopefully next week. So thanks again. And this concludes the public meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.